All right, everyone. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance and attention in the morning session. I am privileged to kick off the afternoon session with two amazing gentlemen that I've had a chance to get to know in the past year. Immediately to my right is Dave Warrick, the EVP of Overhaul, which is the global leader of in-transit supply chain risk management and chairman of advisory board for Algo, who presented earlier and has a booth in the back. Former GM Global Supply Chain and Supply Chain Tech Officer at a small company called Microsoft. 23 years at Microsoft?
23 long years.
We'll get into that. And then a gentleman who needs no introduction to the Northwest Arkansas community. He's on stage one more time. Chris, if I had to officially read your bio and all the boards you're on, we'd be here well past our time. So I'm just going to say you're on a ton of boards, too many to count. You're the current operating partner at New Road and former EVP of Logistics at Walmart, and personally a friend and mentor, somebody that has helped me on board in my last year here at Plug and Play. So thank you for all the coffee at Einstein Bagels and all the Chris, I need help conversations. You bet. All right. So Dave, you traveled here furthest, I think, from the West Coast.
Yes,
Seattle.
From beautiful Seattle.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're going to go first.
Okay.
So you were in a very key lead role at Microsoft at the height of the pandemic. Obviously, challenging, chaotic times. What did you do to implement and maintain inventory and in-stocks, part A? And then part B, what changes to the process did you make along the way to help address the issues going on during COVID at Microsoft?
Great question, Josh, and threw me right in there. The first thing I did was actually cried for a little bit because it was really painful. It's really nice to be back here in Bentonville.
So Dave, I've got to interrupt you. You cried. I jumped for joy because I was retired.
This panel is going to go right off the rails quickly.
So the last time, and I should tell you this, the last time I was actually in Bentonville was probably about maybe 10 or 11 years ago. And I was, let's just say, my presence was requested by Walmart to come and explain
It was a nice note.
It was, well, bits of it were nice, yeah. And the request was that I should come and explain how my supply chain was not going to mess up your Xbox launch.
Oh boy.
Okay, I'm looking at Jennifer Shorkey. I'm looking at Bill Sin. Do you remember those days? Oh, yes.
But thankfully, we were great. And
all because of you.
Largely because of, it's all gone to hell in a handbasket since I retired, but up until then. But the pandemic was, everybody has a horror story around the pandemic. I mean, Microsoft, we went fully remote on March the 5th, 2020. Now, to give you some context, my kids were still going to school, but it was too dangerous for me to go into the office and work. That was the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem was we'd just come through holiday season. So the Microsoft business, the retail business, as most of you know, very, very seasonal. Xbox, Surface, laptops, computers, everything that we sold. Incredibly seasonal. It's all around holiday season. And then what we call the Microsoft fiscal Q3, which is January to March, is our happy, slow, we don't have to do anything, we rebuild all the bridges, we fix all the broken pieces, and we're good to go. So Microsoft went fully remote. The following week, most of corporate America, and in fact, most Fortune 100 companies around the world, also went remote. All of our retail stores closed overnight. All the malls were shut. We couldn't get access to those physical Microsoft stores that we still had at the time. And then something very strange happened. Every CEO of every Fortune 100 company called Satya Nadella and said, I've just sent everybody remote, but we weren't actually prepared to be remote. You need to ship us everything you've got. Now, in true supply chain fashion, everything rolls downhill to yours truly. And we were stuck. We were stuck in a real bind because we had some inventory. We were starting to see China locking down, and all of our manufacturing was in China. We were starting to see impacts on the West Coast. Now, I live in Kirkland, Washington, which is a suburb of Seattle. If you remember back to March the maybe 23rd of 2020, the first known case of COVID in the US was in Kirkland, Washington, a traveler
Was it
from
you?
China. It was not me, but you can imagine just, that was a lot of the Microsoft community live in and around that area. So there was a heightened sense of panic, but then supply chain just went completely off the rails. It went completely nuts. We worked on a quarterly planning cycle, which would lead into a simple monthly one. Within those sort of last 2 weeks of March into early April, we went from quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily. We were trying to figure out how to reposition whatever inventory we had, not only to feed the Fortune 100, but also because the Mayo Clinic, some of the leading hospitals and leading research institutions across the US and across the world needed to have their people working remotely, and they didn't have the equipment to do it. So we had to then suddenly start prioritizing, and all of our systems and all of our architecture, just throw it away. It was Microsoft Excel. It was the only thing that could move quick enough and the only thing that we could actually get our heads around to be able to make those inventory decisions. Now, it's a long tail. You all have your horror stories. We got through it. We got computers out there. We did everything we could. We were sending people in hazmat suits into the Mall of America to empty the Microsoft store to get those laptops to local hospitals. We were helping ship PPE equipment out of China because we still had a couple of shipping lanes open that we were able to actually leverage. We were trying our best in the local communities and local charities to do everything we could. But we started to learn a lot of very valuable lessons around supply chain. First of all, people talk about resilience. We didn't know what that meant. Resilience is a buzzword, right? I still don't know if, people try to sell it to me and I still go, yeah, I don't really understand how any of that works. What I did understand was that the architecture that we built and the systems that we were using to run our supply chain were grotesquely inefficient. They had not moved. Supply chains were built in a fragile way. They were built to be just in time whenever just in time was the right thing. Toyota taught us how to manufacture. They taught us how to build a supply chain which is just in time. Just in time works whenever every node of your supply chain is running at the same level. As soon as any one of those nodes start to disrupt, guess what happens? Your supply chain starts to crumble. What that black swan event was around those early months of 2020, I've still got PTSD, I'll never recover from that. But what we had was not one black swan event, but we had about 5 black swan events, all happening at exactly the same time. And the fragility of the supply chain came to the fore, and we saw all of the cracks that we probably knew already existed, but you can paste over a lot of things with volume. But suddenly, when everything in your supply chain is constrained, there's nowhere to hide, and those cracks become very apparent. So what do? We actually turned to technology. We started looking at it in a different way. The biggest problem that we had was what I call stagnant inventory. It was inventory that was already in the supply chain that had gone too far through my network to actually be able to do anything with. And it was partly due to poor forecasting, but also partly due to the fact that we didn't really understand consumption. We'd never looked at it because we never had to. And so that's when we started leveraging technologies like you saw this morning, technologies like Algo. And what that was, it was about understanding consumption at the retail level, understanding consumption in the omni-channel, so that we knew what products were selling where, and then we were able to look at our fulfillment strategy and say, are we going to be putting the right products in the right place at the right time? It completely overturned everything that we'd ever done from an S&OP perspective, and it brought a new realization. A realization that the standard ERP system was completely inadequate for the modern agile supply chain. And my thinking had been going along these lines for a few years, and I'd been experimenting. COVID was the accelerator that I'd been looking for. And so what happened was we completely threw our strategy out the window and said, we're going to do this differently. Our ERP system being SAP, fabulous system of record, everything you could ever want, but it can only do certain things and it can only move at a certain pace. And what we looked at in the industry was the amount of companies, the amount of innovation and the amount of money that was being pumped into companies, many like you here today, who were really groundbreaking in terms of the way that you were thinking about specific problem sets within the supply chain. So what we said was, we're not going to fight it, we're going to embrace it. And we started then working with the startup community to pull in some of these technologies and make them an included part of a $10 billion Microsoft hardware supply chain. And as Microsoft, we're one of the biggest companies in the world, the question was, but why are you using these small technologies? Like, we've got this relationship with SAP. We can basically go and talk to anybody. Oh, and by the way, we're actually a software company. Why are we even buying technology? Why don't we just build it ourselves? And so, as a supply chain nerd in the company, I got to form a thesis around this. And I said, look, the traditional model has been always around, do I build or do I buy? What if there was a third component to that? And what if that third component was called try? Why do we always think in this binary mode, including supply chain practitioners? We're kind of trained to be either right or wrong. But what if there was a third leg on this stool, and that third leg was try? And that try was entirely focused on new age cutting technologies. And the concept being that as a service, as a quick to deploy, as an easy to adopt, and as a real solution that solves a problem, the next generation of technologies are going to change the landscape, not only of supply chain, but of supply chain architecture. For too long, supply chain has relied on the physical sense, and it's always been software has not been able to catch up. The digital supply chain has now actually surpassed the physical supply chain in terms of capabilities. And all of the work that all of you bring every single day is part of that transformation and part of that legacy. The biggest brands in the world, and I'm lucky enough to get to speak to them a lot of the time, chief supply chain officers, their thinking is starting to shift. Their thinking is starting to go into this model of build versus buy versus try, and they really like the try. Not just because it's cheaper, and not just because it doesn't involve a 4-year project and $100 million, but because a lot of the time they don't even understand the true problem that they're trying to solve. And my thesis is, well, even if you don't understand it, if you start doing something, you start to incubate that change. And incubating that change is really important. Trying a solution, you can only imagine the number of conversations I've had in the middle of last year around the biggest problem in supply chain right now is logistics costs. They've gone through the roof. Tell me how to solve my logistics cost problem. And I would look at it and go, I actually don't think logistics costs are your main problem. And they go, oh, you've been out of it too long, Warrick, you don't know what you're talking about. And I go, no, but think about it. Logistics costs are a consequence of you moving inventory. Have you ever thought that maybe your inventory's in the wrong place to begin with? You're shipping out of geo, you're shipping across the country. That's not a logistics cost problem, that's a consequence, is the logistics cost problem. The reasoning is that you don't know how to manage your inventory close enough to the consumer, close enough to that point of consumption. Second of all, you have no accuracy measures. You don't know, you actually are not paying enough attention to the accuracy. Microsoft at any given week, on any given week, would have accounts outstanding with some of the biggest retailers in the world, not naming any names because I'm in Northwest Arkansas, to the tune of $20 to $30 million. $20 to $30 million because I couldn't prove that I had shipped something which my SAP system told me I had shipped. So what did I do? I went out to the industry. I found a little company called Chorus, who have a booth at the back of the hall and who will present later on today. Chorus system is one which means no scanning. It sits on the dock door of my distribution center. Everything scans, and I've got a pictorial record of every single pallet that is shipped that I can instantly access from the cloud. So whenever those disputes happen, I can then go to my friends who may or may not be based in Northwest Arkansas and say, I shipped this and here's the physical proof that I actually shipped it. I'm not going to 15 different carriers to try and get a proof of delivery, and I'm not spending 3 months going through all of the hoops trying to find that proof of delivery to then present it back to the retailer who then wants to barter with me in terms of, well, in a multi-billion-dollar business, do you really want to argue with me about $20 million? Okay, let's come to an arrangement which is less than $20 million. And this is a big, if you think about the amount of industry and the amount of trade in the US, that accuracy level, again, is something. Now, the bit that I love about working with the startup community is you all have something quite unique. You've all thought about a problem in a certain way, which big corporations have not got their heads around yet. The reason that Microsoft doesn't build supply chain software is because we wouldn't be any good at it. I tried. We had 7 disparate TMS systems, and I figured, as the head of global supply chain, it'd be really cool if I actually knew where everything was at one time on one map of the world. So we thought, we're Microsoft, we'll build it ourselves. We spent a year and an inordinate amount of money, a lot of frustration, and we finally said, yeah, we should never, ever again try to build supply chain software. Because the software itself wasn't the problem, it was the fact that the connectivity that you needed. Turns out we used every single carrier in the entire world at some point. If you wanted to ship in southern Italy, you're going to use Bartolini. You know what? Bartolini do not have an EDI system or an API feed. They have a fax machine. How do you integrate a fax machine? And so we stepped back and said, we're going to do this differently. We picked a partner, we picked C.H. Robinson, and we said, okay, we're going to give you our global freight, but you're going to build a TMS system. And that TMS system is going to connect to every single carrier that Microsoft wants to use or may want to use in the future. And you're going to give us a world on a page, and you're going to give us end-to-end visibility. And they did. They built a product called Navisphere Vision. Navisphere Vision is C.H. Robinson intellectual property. It is Dave Warrick's Microsoft supply chain team's intellectual horsepower. We spent about a year building that. It was beautiful. An 84-inch Surface Hub with a touch screen. You could see ships going across the Pacific and the Atlantic. You could touch the ship. It would bring up the order and what products were on that ship. It showed you over the road. It showed you airlines flying across. It was amazing. You could stand in front of that 84-inch screen and just look at the world of logistics on a page. And once we'd done it, we stood in front of that screen and we said, we have absolutely no idea what problem we've just solved. Because all we had was the visibility, there was no actionable insights. The way that you guys are thinking about supply chain, the way that you're thinking, and I know I'm taking a lot of time here. Sorry, you asked a complicated question. But the way that you're thinking,
It's only question number 1.
the way that you're thinking about supply chain has to be around, think that the work that corporations would love to do but they can't do, the problems that they want to solve that they don't know how to solve, the way that they address and they bring a problem to you is not always the answer that they're actually looking for. And so as you present to those corporations, they don't want to buy a product, they want to buy a solution. They want to buy a solution that's easy to deploy, that's not going to take a lot of their brain trust to be able to actually make work, and they want a return on investment as quickly as possible. Those are the key elements that I looked for, and those are the key companies that I actually deployed as part of the Microsoft supply chain. They all have those same characteristics, but each of them delivers real value at a real point in time to a problem that I couldn't even properly define. I can't remember the second part of the question.
Oh, no, that was first, second, and third part. You did great there. But I will say I love the try, and I promised Martin from Koros that there will be a line of about 20 people deep, because I've heard in Northwest Arkansas there are issues with labeling and alignment on what shipped and didn't ship. So I know that they'll be very popular this afternoon, and thank you for flying in for this. We greatly appreciate it. Mr. Sultemeier. Since you left Walmart in 2017, you've been doing a lot of stuff, both inside Northwest Arkansas and outside Northwest Arkansas. As you've looked at it from the outside looking in, what are you noticing? And with your crystal ball, what are you seeing now looking forward?
Yeah, I think I'll hold off on the crystal ball part. But the thing I've noticed as I've had a chance to look outside of Walmart, I think in Walmart we had a healthy, maybe it was humbleness, but probably it was a little bit more inferiority complex, especially when it came to companies like Amazon. You know, Amazon's so good, we're trying to figure this out, we're Walmart, blah, blah, blah. The amazing thing for me, as I've had a chance to interact with a lot of other retailers and a lot of other retail supply chains, as well as CPG supply chains, everybody has the same problems. The problems we had at Walmart are not unique to Walmart. Those same problems are replicated at every other company. I thought it was interesting, a couple of things, I'm going to go back to what Dave said that I thought were great points. One was the concept of JIT. At Walmart, we were so focused, and I'm talking in the past tense, so any of you current Walmart people that are here, this is past tense. At Walmart, from a logistics standpoint, we were so focused on cost containment, trying to drive cost out of the supply chain. That was our focus. Take cost out, take cost out. So the whole idea of carrying excess inventory, that was a taboo. How do you take inventory out? How do you reduce cost? And then the things I saw when the pandemic hit is everybody, not just Microsoft, everybody got caught. Nobody had those backup stocks of inventory ready to go. No one had the ability to flex their supply chain. That whole concept of resiliency, the term I use is optionality. You got to have a lot of options. And suddenly when those options start getting choked off, and everyone had options that got choked off, then you needed other options. And so those would be some of the learnings that I would have, that I would say, Josh, from my standpoint, looking at the broader landscape that I see. But I don't think anyone will go back to a hardcore, blinders on each side of their face, JIT mentality. I think everyone's going to approach it now, at least for the next 10 or 15 years, until people forget about the pandemic. I think they're going to approach it from the standpoint of, we've got to have a level of buffer inventory to protect our consumer. Because you've got to keep your focus on the consumer and not trying to optimize your supply chains so tight that you reduce all flexibility.
And then if I asked you to predict with a crystal ball, I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges now happening at the ports once again. Like, what do you see rest of year and maybe heading into early 2024?
Everyone talks about a freight rebound in the second half of the year. I think there's a lot of people right now that are calling into question when that second half of the year is going to happen, and if the movement of goods is actually going to pick up, Josh, and how quickly it's going to come back. It will come back. People will eventually get through the glut of inventory and have to restock. The thing I hear from other retailers today is they're getting their inventory pared down, but it's not necessarily the right inventory and the right items. So they may have pared down some of their faster moving items, but they're still stuck with a slog of inventory in slower moving items. So the overall inventory numbers may look better, but if you get and you really dissect it down, it's not as much of the good as it is the bad, and they would rather have more of the good. So I don't have necessarily a forecast. I continue to hear that we've bottomed out on ocean rates, and that ocean rates are leveled out where they are right now, and that they're probably going to start coming back some. But every time I hear that, I think about the glut of ships that are coming online in the market. And there's a lot of shipping capacity coming online. So it's hard for me to believe ocean contract rates don't have more room to fall.
Chris, I'm going to stay with you and then finish back with Dave.
Sure.
Both of you have now stepped away from large companies in the last few years. Both of you have been very involved in the investment space and the startup space, doing a ton of different things, serving on boards. If you could go back to your big company days, knowing what you know now from startups and investment and different ways of working and trying, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think I'm going to use a couple of examples to illustrate the point. I think the ability for big companies to move faster is a challenge, and the ability for startup companies to have the staying power to stick with big companies as they go through that maturity cycle in that relationship. So let me give you an example. I think it was 07 or 08, we started a relationship with a company called Plug Power. And we started playing with how you would use hydrogen fuel cells in forklifts, because we knew that that was a better solution than electrified forklifts. We worked with Plug Power for about 3 or 4 years before we finally started rolling out hydrogen fuel cells at multiple facilities and multiple forklift fleets. But it took us, Walmart, back in that time, a long time to get that figured out. So I think the challenge is, how do you do that process? How do you iterate faster? One other example for Walmart, and this one was at the end of my time with Walmart, but it goes to modern day Walmart. And that is the whole relationship that they've had with Symbotic. So we actually struck a contractual relationship with Symbotic. If y'all don't know, those that didn't hear Carissa Sprague talk earlier today, she was talking about the automation that's going on in the ambient DCs. And it's a company that's called Symbotic that's doing a lot of that automation. We started that relationship in 16. It rolled out in 22. So it takes a long time. And so how does the big company move faster? How does the startup company help the big company move faster? And how does the startup company have the staying power to know that to get these massive enterprise customers and a whole rollout of the entire network, it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of investment, and a lot of diligence on both parties' parts. So that would be, Josh, how do you move faster? And at the same time that you're moving faster, how do you have that staying power to keep the journey going?
Love it. Thank you. Dave?
It is a great question. I mean,
Thank you.
It's kind of interesting because, I left the other side of the board table, if you like, around this time last year. So I'm about a year into career 4. And I see a couple of things which are really interesting. First of all, I see scope creep as a real problem on both sides. From a startup perspective, whenever you get that big customer, whenever you get that big brand, it's inherent in the DNA of those big brands that when they find something that works, to double down and then double down and then double down again. And what that means from a startup perspective on the other side of the table is you're continually being offered more carrots. And that can be really dangerous because very quickly the sandbox that you have perfected and the sandbox that you are expert in, suddenly the walls of that sandbox start to crumble and you're being asked to do more. And it's incredibly enticing. And I'm not sure that I have the right answer. I think that it's somewhere between you should be careful to stay within your own swim lane, but also don't be silly about opportunity. And it does lead into this, interesting other paradox, which is, on one hand, the general advice would be, what got you here will not get you to where you can optimally go. And you'll hear that. There's another part of it, which is, yeah, but don't forget you're a startup. And I run into this challenge nearly on a daily basis, whereby I've got small companies wanting to be a big company who, in doing so, create infrastructures which don't make any sense because they're not the next IBM. And trying to you've got to be careful that the pendulum doesn't swing too far in either direction in any of these ways, be it in your offering, be it in your relationship with a big brand, but also within your own company and how you're thinking about it. Yes, you do have to think to the future, and yes, what got you here may not actually get you to where you could optimally be, but don't get too big too fast and think that you're already solving world hunger and you are Google. You're not yet. And so finding that balance and having that patience, I think, is the advice that I would give right now.
I love it. At the risk of getting my hand slapped by Frederick, Elaine, and everybody else, because this is such a unique panel and we have 2.5 minutes, I will open it up to one question, because I'm sure everybody wants to hear or ask these gentlemen a question, and hopefully you guys are okay with that. Is there any good questions in the room? No, sir?
There's one at the back.
One in the back.
Going forward.
One more time, please.
China and what its role is in terms of supply chain resiliency, optionality.
Ooh, that's a fun one.
Yeah, I'll start off, and then Dave, jump to you. I think you have to have other sources. I think if you don't have other sources, I see what Apple just recently did with the big initiative around India and everything that's going on there. I think you need to have other levels, other options from a supply planning standpoint, and that takes time to develop those other suppliers that can help you that may not be in that part of the world. But I think it's something that every company needs to focus on. You need to have options.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to follow on that, the biggest challenge with the Apple move right now, and there's a great article by a guy called Patrick McGee of the Financial Times, and he wrote several different pieces about this. And it's not the fact of Foxconn moving a factory from China to India. It's the fact that if you visit that Foxconn facility in China, it's surrounded by an infrastructure of capabilities.
That's exactly right.
That has been built over 25 years.
Yep.
And so just picking up the box itself and moving it to India is only the start of it. Yeah, it's only the start of the problem. There's an entire infrastructure, and just from the different snippets that I've heard, right now the majority of Apple's sourcing component parts are coming from China to India.
Thank you both, and thank you both for being here and being great partners to Plug and Play. And I believe you'll both be here for the networking session for additional chat and follow-up. But how about a hand for these two wonderful gentlemen for taking the time?